Hi everyone, it's Soytheist. On this channel, I usually discuss directly the ethics and morality of eating animals. But today, as has been voted for by my patrons, I want to do something slightly different. I want to discuss the psychology of eating animals, why we eat some animals and love others. Let's start with a thought experiment. And we'll do this thought experiment from the perspective of a non-vegan because I'd like us to understand why we as a society eat some animals and love others. Okay? So anyway, with that cleared up, let's begin. Imagine you're at a friend's dinner party, right? And you have been promised by your friend that the food is going to be amazing. And therefore, in anticipation for this amazing food, you haven't eaten since the afternoon. You're starving for food. You're waiting for a long time, and finally, the food is served. You can already tell from the smell, from the look, that the food is going to be delicious. So you serve yourself a hefty piece, and you dig in. And indeed, your friend was right, your senses were right, the food is indeed amazing. After having eaten for a while and having removed your hunger, you approach your friend. And you tell your friend, well, this is amazing. What's the recipe for this? I want to try it out someday myself. And your friend tells you, oh, that's simple. You start with 3 kilograms of dog meat. But as soon as you hear that, if you're like most people, you feel revolted. You're probably thinking, is that really the flesh of a once living dog in my mouth? Like, you're absolutely revolted, and your revulsion is quite visible on your face. Now, at this point, your friend notices your revulsion and shock on your face, and she tells you, don't worry, I was just joking with you. That's actually the meat from a goat. You probably feel a bit relieved. What's going on here? How is it that certain foods can cause such strong emotional reactions? How is it possible that the same food, given one name, is highly palatable, but the same food, given a different name, becomes virtually inedible? Clearly, it's not the physical makeup of the meat or the flesh, whatever you like to call it, that's causing this difference, because throughout this whole process, right, the meat, the flesh on your plate remain the same. There's something else going on. Let's find out what it is. How we perceive a situation, the meaning we make of it, largely determines how we think and feel of it. Think about our relationship with dogs. It is not much different from our relationship with other human beings. We call them by their names. We say goodbye when we leave. We greet them when we arrive back at home. We play with them. We share our beds with them, and so on, right? We don't have a similar relationship with pigs, mostly, or goats, or chickens, or cows. Our perceptions of these animals, and ultimately our perceptions of the meat, of the flesh procured from their corpses, differ. Not only do our perceptions of meat vary depending on which species of animals it came from, but different human beings may view the same meat differently. Someone raised in a culture where eating dogs is normal might not have the same revulsion that you felt when you were told that you were eating dog meat in that thought experiment. What causes these differences in perception? These differences in perception are caused due to our schema. A schema is a sort of psychological framework that shapes and is shaped by our beliefs, by our ideas, by our experiences, and our perceptions. And it automatically organizes and interprets incoming information. For example, when you hear the word nurse, you probably think of a woman in a medical uniform. This is despite the fact that there are many nurses who are men, right, who dress non-traditionally, and so on. Unless you are frequently exposed to nurses, your schema will maintain this generalized image of a nurse, of a woman in a medical uniform. Generalizations are the consequence of schemas doing what they're supposed to do, which is sorting through and interpreting the vast amount of stimuli that we're constantly exposed to and then putting them into general categories. Basically, schemas act as a sort of mental classification system. We have a schema for everything, and that includes non-human animals. For example, a non-human animal can be a prey, can be a predator, can be a pest, can be a pet, and can be food. How we classify a non-human animal determines how we relate to them, whether we hunt them, whether we flee them, whether we exterminate them, whether we love them, or whether we eat them. Some overlap can occur, but when it comes to meat or eggs and dairy, a non-human animal is either classified as edible or inedible. By the way, if you're finding this video to be insightful, do be sure to hit that subscribe button and that like button. I would be pretty psyched if you did that. Something very interesting happens when we're confronted with the meat, egg, or dairy of an animal whom we have considered to be inedible, whom we have classified as inedible. We automatically picture the living animal from whom these products were procured from. For example, if I give you dog meat, the following perceptual process will occur. The dog meat is the stimulus, right? And that leads you to the belief that it's an inedible animal, right? You've classified dogs as inedible animals. That leads you to the thought, to the picture of a living dog, right? That's the image that forms, right? And because of that image, you feel disgust, right? Because that's a living animal. That's a corpse of a once living animal. That's your feeling. You have a feeling of disgust. And ultimately, that leads you to a reluctance or even revulsion to eating that flesh. By contrast, probably none of this happens when you're given the flesh of a pig or a goat or a chicken and so on. You don't think of the animal from whom the meat was procured in this scenario, right? Sure, you know the flesh comes from a living animal, right? From a once living sentient animal, but you don't make that mental connection. However, even if we do make this mental connection that, we see the flesh of a pig or a goat or a chicken, and we make that mental connection to the image of a once sentient living animal, we probably don't feel the same level of disgust and repulsion and revulsion that we felt when we thought of a living dog when we were given dog meat, right? Because after all, we have classified dogs as inedible animals. Because according to our schemas, at least in most cultures, a dog is not meant to be eaten. It is an odd phenomenon about how we react to the thought of eating inedible animals. But even stranger than that is how we don't have any reaction at the thought of eating edible animals. I mean, have you ever wondered why out of the tens of thousands of animal species that exist, you probably feel disgusted at the idea of eating almost every one of them? Almost every one of them, except a tiny handful of species whom you probably eat regularly. The evidence strongly suggests that this lack of disgust is learned. The evidence strongly suggests that our schemas are mostly, if not entirely, constructed. So we lose our sense of disgust. Sure. But that's not all we lose. We lose something that is far more crucial to our sense of self. We lose our empathy. The system teaches us how not to feel. But why? Why go through all of these psychological and mental acrobatics? Why does the system go to such great lengths to teach us how not to feel? Well, the answer is simple. It's because we care about non-human animals. And because we care about them, we don't want them to suffer. But because we eat them, we not only cause them to suffer, but we cause them to suffer tremendously and unnecessarily. In essence, our behavior is not aligned with our values. So now we are left with three options. Number one, we change our behavior, we modify our behavior to align with our values, which I submit is what we should do. Number two, we change our values so that they align with our behavior. Or number three, we change the perception of our behavior so that they seem to align with our values. Now, as a society, it is absolutely clear that what we do is the third option. But it's very interesting to note how we do this, how we change the perception around our behavior. We do this primarily by something called psychic numbing. Psychic numbing is a psychological phenomenon by which we disconnect ourselves mentally and emotionally from our experiences. We numb ourselves. In and of itself, this is not a bad thing, right? It helps us cope with the world. I'll give you an example. Psychic numbing helps you when you're driving down a highway in your car. Like if you were cognizant, if you're continuously cognizant of the fact that you're speeding down a road in essentially what is a metal box surrounded by other metal boxes, you would never be able to drive on a highway ever again. You would probably always be thinking of a car crash, which you might unfortunately be a part of, which you unfortunately might face. Psychic numbing helps you with this, right? It helps you cope with this. Psychic numbing is adaptive and beneficial when it helps us cope with violence, but it becomes a maladaptive and destructive when it helps us to enable violence, such as when we enable the killing of innocent sentient animals for being turned into food for our temporary taste pleasure. This invisible system, it allows us, it enables us to perpetually, continuously, and unnecessarily harm non-human animals for temporary pleasure. It forms the invisible belief system of Carnism, the belief system that conditions us to eat some animals and not others. Therefore, one of the first steps to deconstructing this continuous harm that we cause onto non-human animals is to expose the system that is at play here. And that is what I've tried to do here today by explaining this in a consumable form in a YouTube video. Now, all of what I've just told you today in this video is heavily based on the works of Dr. Melanie Joy and her book, Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows. And all of this is just based on the first chapter of that book. There is much more to be learned in the later chapters of that book. I think it's a fantastic book and I thoroughly recommend it. You should check it out. If I'm able to find links to buy the book, I will leave them in the description box down below. Anyway, if you find my work to be valuable, if you like these videos and would like to help me create more of them, you can support me via Patreon. It's the first link in the description box. You can follow me on social media here. This is the video YouTube thinks you like the best. This is the video that I have published most recently. Be sure to let me know what your thoughts are about this video in the comment section down below, and I'll see you there.